Okay, so it's pretty much treated as this absolute unshakable biological rule, right? The second you hit 18, or, maybe 20 if you're lucky, your height is permanently locked in. Your growth plates close up and, well, whatever height you've got right then is exactly what you're stuck with for the rest of your life. But what if the research we're unpacking today completely flips that on its head? What if your bones could actually still grow as long as you know exactly how to trigger them? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're breaking down a seriously fascinating theory on human biology.
To even wrap our heads around how this is possible, we have to look at a pretty crazy real-world anomaly. Take Devin Larratt. He is a world-class arm wrestler. If you really look at him, his dominant wrestling arm is literally and measurably longer than his other arm. And no, this isn't just some weird genetic quirk. I mean, you don't just inherit one extremely long arm, right? It's the direct result of years and years of intense arm wrestling. He's been applying constant localized mechanical stress to that one specific limb.
And honestly, that anomaly opens the door to a much bigger conversation. So this explainer is all about a very specific, actionable biological playbook. The source material outlines a process that claims you can actually stimulate bone growth at almost any age, potentially adding literal inches to your height even way after you thought you were done growing. But fair warning right up front, it takes some serious physical effort. All right, let's dive right into this playbook. We're going to hit 4 distinct steps today. First, the bone growth loophole. Second, stretching through adaptive remodeling. Third, building height with microfractures. And finally, the essential nutrients for bone growth. But before we get to those steps, we have to understand the foundational science here, which is Wolff's Law. Basically, this is the biological principle that says bones are not these fixed, static things. They aren't like the steel beams of a skyscraper. They're dynamic. They're living tissue. They remodel, they adapt, and they literally change their shape and density based entirely on the mechanical stress you put on them. Put simply, if you stimulate them the right way, they have absolutely no choice but to respond.
Okay, so that brings us to Section 1, the bone growth loophole, and how to extend growth plate life.
So your growth plates are essentially the control centers for your height. Usually, these close up somewhere between 18 and 20 for guys. But it actually all boils down to a specific hormonal mechanism, the balance between estrogen and testosterone. Think back to middle school for a second. Remember how girls always hit their growth spurts first and shot right past the boys, but then a few years later, the boys caught up and overtook them? Well, that happens because estrogen actually forces growth plates to close faster. Testosterone, on the flip side, keeps those growth plates open longer. The whole theory here is that if you can naturally manipulate this hormonal balance, you might just keep your growth plates open until you're 23, or, hey, in some rare cases, even up to 28.
So how exactly do you hack this balance naturally? Well, the source material points to some very specific lifestyle and dietary tweaks. First off, it advises cutting back on soy foods. Stuff like soy chunks, tofu, soy milk, mostly because they can slightly bump up estrogen levels. Next, you've got to sweat every single day. And no, just sitting in a sauna doesn't count for this. Sweating helps your body flush out estrogen, so hitting the track, playing sports, or training hard is absolutely key. It specifically highlights lower body explosive movements, think sprinting or skipping rope, as prime ways to naturally spike testosterone and human growth hormone. Oh, and diet-wise, you want to load up on protein and zinc. We're talking eggs, lentils, fish, pumpkin seeds, all that good stuff to fuel that testosterone production.
Moving right along to Section 2, stretching through adaptive remodeling and the power of constant stretching.
So this introduces a really fascinating biological cause and effect chain. Remember Wolff's Law we just talked about? Well, this is basically Wolff's Law playing out over the long term. Adaptive remodeling is the process where bones slowly reshape and adjust themselves to make a repeated stress or a repeated movement easier on your body. Your body is just incredibly efficient. If you are constantly stretching it, it's going to literally try to lengthen those bones to handle that demand. Let's look at 2 incredible examples to really picture this. First up, evolutionary history. Giraffes. Their impossibly long necks evolved over generations simply because they were constantly stretching upward to reach higher leaves. That constant physical demand forced a biological adaptation. The second example is right here in the modern world. Take the Netherlands. They have some of the absolute tallest people on the planet, and research links this to their massive culture of daily cycling from a super young age. All that reaching down for the pedals creates a constant stretching stimulus on the legs. It's wild, right? And that leads perfectly into a super actionable technique outlined in the playbook, a specific leg stretching routine using just a standard bicycle. Here's how it works.
First, you raise the seat height on your bike. You want it up high enough so that when the pedal is at its absolute lowest point, your leg is completely, perfectly straight, no bend in the knee at all. This basically forces maximum stretch every single time you push down. You do this every day. And here is the absolutely crucial progressive overload part. You increase that seat height just a tiny bit more every single month. Over time, your legs are forced to adaptively remodel to max that new stretch. Though, fair warning, your hamstrings are probably going to complain quite a bit at first.
All right, on to Section 3, building height with microfractures, or as it's sometimes called, the Maasai tribe's secret.
Now, what's really interesting about this strategy is that it's anchored by an incredible cultural observation. Over in East Africa, the Maasai tribe is globally famous for their massive vertical jumps, which are a huge core part of their cultural dances. The theory here is that this constant daily jumping causes tiny microscopic fractures in their shin bones. And when the body heals those tiny fractures, it lays down brand new bone tissue. Over time, that cycle of breaking and healing literally leads to the lengthening of the bone.
Just to put that into perspective for a second, the average height of the Maasai tribe is a towering 6 foot 3 inches. That is no joke. The constant repetitive impact of all that jumping serves as this massive biological stimulus for both bone density and vertical bone growth. So how do you safely replicate something like that? The playbook suggests a very controlled microfracture routine. Basically, you do 3 sets of 30 jumps every single day. The secret ingredient here is total consistency. And the really big claim is that if you combine this daily jumping impact with the adaptive stretch of that cycling routine we just talked about, you could potentially see up to 3 to 4 inches of growth at practically any age. Why? Because this specific type of bone growth, the kind driven by microfractures, supposedly doesn't even require your growth plates to be open. And that brings us to our final part, Section 4, essential nutrients for bone growth and how to actually fuel this adaptation.
Look, you can jump and cycle all day long, but applying all that mechanical stress is totally useless if you aren't giving your body the actual biological building blocks it needs to create new bone. Getting your nutrition dialed in is absolutely crucial here, starting with vitamin D, which you ideally want to get from daily sunlight. This is literally a non-negotiable requirement for bone growth. Next up, protein and calcium. You need these to physically build and strengthen that new bone tissue, so think dietary sources like red meat and milk. And finally, there's a highly specific micronutrient you need, boron. You can find it in things like black raisins, nuts, and avocados. Boron acts like a catalyst. It basically helps your body actually process and utilize all that vitamin D effectively. It's the whole shebang. We've definitely covered a ton of ground today, unpacking a pretty controversial but undeniably fascinating playbook. From hacking your estrogen levels, to raising your bike seat, to jumping daily like the Maasai, it all hinges on this one radical idea, that your skeletal frame isn't quite as finalized as you were taught in high school biology. So, the final thought I'm going to leave you with today is this. Knowing that your bones respond directly to the physical demands you put on them, are you ready to test Wolff's Law and see if you can trigger your own adaptive remodeling? Thanks so much for exploring this with me, and hey, always keep questioning what you think you know about your own body.